Toke, I'm really feeling honored to get to be in dialogue with you today. Your work has started to feel like a spiritual home for me personally, looking for a home that makes room for all the parts of me. So thank you for being one of the originators of Art of Hosting. Tell me a little bit about your spiritual roots and how this really began for you so many years ago.
Now, using the word spiritual has
Ooh.
many meanings to many people, and I'm quite careful with giving it any label,
Mm.
whatever. But certainly, you know, to me, looking at the world, born in 1948 after the Second World War, 3 years after the Germans had to go back to Germany because they lost the war, and being brought up in a family who, at one point, my parents, when they were just married, lived in Copenhagen, a young couple, decided to enter the resistance movement towards, and that became strong towards the 42, 43, during the Second World War. The Germans took Denmark for 5 years, from uh, April 1940 until the capitulation in 4th of May 1945. So reason I'm bringing all that in is certainly because what we are experiencing today, and in your own origin country, and in many other countries, is the bully dictatorship rule that has come into place, just as it did for Hitler and the Nazis. And somehow, though I was not born during that war, growing up in this family of loving and caring parents, with my sister, it somehow penetrated the DNA of how we were raised and what was going on in our family. Some values and some practices, I would call it today. When I was younger, I didn't really see it, but I benefited from it. And one of them was that it's, before anything else, we are human beings and we can learn. My mother and father both came out of a tradition of learners, school teachers. Even my grandfather on my father's side was a blacksmith, but he was also a gymnastics practitioner. And so was my other grandfather and grandmother, who created a school for PE teachers from the English Empire from 1905 till 1940, when the Germans came, and the school stopped because they made it the headquarters of the German army here in Silkeborg, where I live now. So through my lineages of very simple, down to earth, salt of the earth kind of people, not in any way would say that they had a spiritual or religious, approach to life, but they were lovers of nature. They were lovers of being in harmony with other people and with nature, and learning and practice was in their fabric. And so I think I benefited greatly for this. And as I grew older and myself beginning to look at the world and the possibility of an atomic war between America and Russia in my, first years of high school, and then the whole raising up of the young people at that time, what later became called the hippie movement, but was basically the rising up of social entrepreneurship and a resistance towards just living for material things. that we needed to discover who we were first before we attended to being members of society, all influenced me really deeply. And there's another thing maybe that would be interesting to your question, is that in Denmark, we had in our history, like and I realized of the stories of the last week, that the English burned down the American Congress in 1813 or 1812 or something. Well, they certainly were into burning down things in the time of the empire, because in 1807 they came to Copenhagen. They had beaten Napoleon at Waterloo, and we had a Danish sovereign king at that time. These were the dictators of Denmark. They were kings, and some of them were good people, some of them were mad, and some of them were psychopaths. And the one we had, he also wanted to become a Napoleon. So he had sided with Napoleon and spent all the Danish funds on the war against the English to, he wanted to become the Napoleon of Scandinavia, this king. So Napoleon loses, Denmark loses, England sends the fleet in 1907 to Copenhagen and says, you have lost, you have to pay us a lot of money, otherwise we will take your fleet. And the king was bankrupt. He had spent all the money on his own way of living and in the war. And so he said, I won't give you our fleet because, this protects our trade ships in the world. And this is how we can reestablish our health. So English said, okay, and then they firebombed Copenhagen and burned down a third of Copenhagen, not just the parliament, but a third of the homes of Copenhagen got burned down by the English. Now, coming out of this, the king and his son realized they had to shift their paradigm. Sovereign kingship would not work any longer. And they, had the evidence from France that if you became too arrogant, the people would cut the heads off, which they had just done at the revolution in France. So they initiated the crown prince initiated an initiative. So in 1813, Denmark goes bankrupt because of the war. We lose our fleet and everything. And then the guy, he had a mentor. He had relationship to somebody in the older generation, a learning relationship. The guy happened to be, his name was Reventlow, and he was one of the most powerful of the other power in Denmark at that time, which was the noblemen and their families. And the crown prince and the noblemen, in conversation and dialogue with each other, realized that they had to do something I would call glasnost from Gorbachev's efforts in the Soviet, that they had to begin to create a more democratic rule. And so, but they realized that the one thing that needed to happen was that all people needed to have equal education, and that education was a strategic tool. And at that time, so they said, the king announced, we may be poor now because we have lost all our money. We don't have to be dumb. So I will initiate and make obligatory education for all kids. And so the Danish school system arose out of this in the next 20 years. In all cities, towns, and villages, schools arose, and kids were invited to become students at these schools in order to learn how to be citizens for the next generations. At the same time, a group of other people Grundtvig and Kohl, who were actually inspired priests. So they were more than just Christian priests. They were inspired people, but they were Christian priests and had their own, church, duties and all that. They created an adult education system called the folk high schools. And this became another educational revolution over the next 40 years. Not these two men, they thought up the idea. We need to educate, we need to create educational processes in which the grown-ups, the people who had not had education, they had been basically serfs and slaves of the king and the nobleman family. We need to, create processes where they can rise up and everybody can become a citizen. And the way they defined this, Traci, it's fantastic. When you think about 200 years ago, they said we want to educate people for, they call it enlightenment. Not for papers, not for grades, but that each human being needs to be awake in order to become a citizen. And so the principles of these schools, the purpose of these schools was to help whoever would attend, men and women together, all grown-ups, coming many from farmer families and poor parts of Denmark, and they were then 5 months. A day was working in the fields, helping cooking and cleaning with the school, and then 2 or 3 hours of educating the spirit, of becoming awake to poetry, to history, to dialogue, sitting in circles, and being in dialogue about the at this time, what is democracy? So the big conversations came about. And particularly the area I live here, we have paintings from that time of great meetings. So, in the weekends, people would gather and talk about what does it mean to be a democratic citizen and all of this. So it's amazing evolution. So in 40 years after the bankruptcy, a Danish school systems for kids were created, an adult school system that also gave birth to the collective movement, the farmers' collective movement. And then the next step for the Reventlow and the king was they created a land reform. They convinced all the other noblemen who were in power and who owned Denmark, basically, all the land, that they had to give away their power and create a democratic constitution, which then happened in 1849. And then that, so in 40 years, these 3 social evolutions took place. And the reason I'm bringing all of that history into your question is that all my grandparents and my great-grandparents were involved in all of this. Somehow, and my parents, they all went to these folk high schools themselves after they, and somehow, and these schools are still existing. And I know from Juanita Brown, my friend and colleague, also from San Francisco, now in North Carolina with David there, that when she was young and in the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s, she didn't come, but some other people from that movement came to Denmark to study at these schools, and some of the principles they brought back, and it seeded itself into the DNA of the civil rights movement in America. Now, so this is in my blood, in my in my country and in my family, and I could distill, if I should then come to your question, what are the spiritual, things that I base myself on? So one is that everybody is a human being before anything else. And my dad always told me, everybody has something to contribute.
Mm.
Doesn't matter. You have to find and see that in the other, what their contribution is. And you yourself has something to contribute. Don't try to photocopy. And my mom's teaching was, I don't care what you become, as long as you become a happy human being.
Mm.
So from this, I, came into the world as a young, after high school, I finished in 67. And then I had decided to drive to India by car before the hippie movement. I heard about hippie when I came back from India, but I drove with 3 friends all through, for half a year, traveled the cultures of, all of Europe and all of the Middle East and Turkey and Afghanistan and India, and saw that with the eyes of seeing, looking for the essence. And what I was already then aware of, I was reading the Tao Te Ching in high school with my friend and the sayings of Buddha. And I realized that underneath all the spiritual practices and belief systems and religious perception of life and the universe and people and society and all of that, there were some basic similarities that seemed to be timeless. And a reading in the Tao Te Ching, at first I thought this is nice in Chinese poetry, and then it began to make sense to me that here is some wisdom that even if it's like this guy or whoever wrote it 2,600 years ago, still speaks to this little guy, me being 16, 20, 25, and I still read it, and it inspires me because it's void of interpretation. It just is. So I'm a seeker of wisdom wherever I can get it.
Yeah.
And then so I think I've chosen practices that allows me to find that, like, I was speaking, in to someone the other day about, my practices. And I said, those practices that allows me to connect to that peaceful calm that is wordless, that is like the rock of silent strength, of peace, of kindness in us. There's many names, but it's one thing that can be experienced and that we all have. Those practices that can allow me to become not just intellectually conscious, but in my full consciousness, be in the moment of that why, in the midst of chaos. Those are my practices that I hold dear. And I practiced Aikido. I've chosen a very wonderful meditation practice when I was young, and I stay with it. Every day I sit for an hour, and I walk in nature, and I try to just let go of things that are not necessary to keep in my head, just to have that empty. And I found that with these practices, I somehow can, most of the time, keep myself in that same harmonious sense of well-being that I remember I had when I was a kid. And I realized it's still there. It's because it's always there, but if I need to be focused on. So, and I think, if we should relate it a bit to art of hosting and my sort of caution with using the word spiritual or the word because there's some people who, he says, I'm a spiritual person. But what about a person who doesn't think he's a spiritual
I
person?
have to tell you, I think it's funny I use the word spiritual with you too, because I kind of loathe the word sometimes, but I like that we're kind of playing with it. But yeah, I
Yes.
hear what you're saying.
So there's something there that the next, what follows out of all of this was then beginning to look later, because I was, maybe I'll stop there and let you ask another question, because I have a long way to get to this. So.
Well, I feel really with you. I mean, what's happening as I'm listening to you is I'm hearing that you have this ground of being. And what keeps coming to mind is this word belonging, because as an American, if you asked me about my history, I would never give you or go as far back into history as you just did. And I'm like, gosh, Toke has all of those people inside of him. He knows where he comes from. And then I got this image of you, and I don't know, when you said the folk schools, I got an image of a really sweet hut, right? And it's like a huddle around a fire. Whereas for me, from my cultural context, I feel like we're still wandering the earth trying to figure out where we belong. There isn't this narrative of our history. And so I was just feeling that as I was with you. And I remember something that you'd said in one of the community calls that I was on recently that really touched me, because you brought up the word learning several times in your dialogue with me thus far. And it really moved me. But I don't have the exact quote on my notes here, but it was something along the lines of, learning is the foundation of equality. It's we all have the capacity to learn. And I hear it in this thread line. And I love the way that you contextualize it too, that learning isn't necessarily how to produce wealth, it's how to be a good citizen. There's something that really touched me about that idea.
Imagine the consciousness, the understanding of the initiators of the foci schools, creating a school which purpose is not your identity in the world. It's who you are. And that I've heard from one of my friends who's also an auto hosting practitioner and very highly placed in the Danish school system, as a leader in one of the biggest municipalities in Copenhagen, responsible for supporting the headmasters of all these schools. He's a Danish educator, but he also has his family threads back into what I was just describing. And as we were exploring what we knew about the beginnings and the deeper, threads and purpose of these foci schools, he said, my understanding is that the purpose of these schools was to help the students and whoever was teaching and leading there be awake enough so that they could be making a conscious choice of how they would participate and contribute as citizens in their communities, in the society. And that is a profound shift from many of, or even unconsciously, it may be lying in our educational systems, but that's something that has been warped a little bit. And I think, coming to your, pointing to learning, that one of the downfalls of the long-term evolution of our societies is the separation, the divorce, in some places, real divorce between education and learning. And one of my passions, I realize now in my older years, and why I began to explore with some of my close mates, what could be an alternative way of meeting that didn't, and we gathered all the practices we appreciated and, created a pattern that we call the art of hosting and harvesting conversations and work that matter.
Mm.
Uh, but the essence of it is really, how may we bring learning back to education, back to our lives, understanding learning as an equalizer.
Mm-hmm.
There are only a few things I think that are the same for every human being.
Mm.
One is, we are all born from a mother. We all have a lifetime and we all must die.
Mm.
This is realities. We all are kept alive by breath, like everything else. Without breath, no life. The life force comes to us as that rhythm of breath. And if you look at all spiritual wisdom practices of any quality that are not just entertaining the mind, but is really opening the consciousness of the heart, have all the quality of focus in your breath, surrender into the breath, feel your breath, however it is spoken, sit and be with the breath. And you go with your thoughts, bring your attention back to the breath and let the thoughts go, because they're just clouds, but the breath can take you to the sky, or however you explain it. And one more thing that is the same for everyone. We are fantastically endowed. This human race can excel in learning. And when we learn together, this is probably what we were talking about in that other call, when we learn together, it's an equalizer. And it's not who is saying it or whose idea is it, because what is new, because we think we discover something, we think it's new, but look, we are standing on thousands of shoulders back in time. And other people will stand on, if we leave something valuable and it's worth standing on, then, we are just a pair of shoulders, and then we go to the grave. So I have found this interesting, and I thought, whatever can take us to be based in those realities, if it's the same for everybody, it may be able to take us to the culture under all cultures, the culture that is not infested by the interpretations of the human mind, but they are, as my Indian elders in Vancouver Island and one of the tribes, the Chalnu tribe, that they say, find the basic instructions of the universe and practice them diligently, 24/7. And I think many of us who are now meeting in the web of practitioners called the art of hosting are people who are, had similar journeys, but differently, of course, but that we are seeking those practices that can be based in the natural reality of the living system of which we are, we have snowstorm today.
I have snow in my house too.
It's very seldom in Denmark now. But anyway, I think that, and that, because yes, the art of hosting, yes, methodologies, yes, let's work together. But I think if the driving force of this is to be learning how we can live better and more harmoniously and more sustainable together and create well-being for everything and everybody on the planet, then we've got something. Then we can be practitioners and friends with purpose. And we are not led by any human being. We are led by the love for learning and a concern and a hunger, a concern for the disharmony that human race is creating, and with a love for the harmony that we also can have with each other. I mean, look, human beings can be the most beautiful beings, but we can also be the most horrible, dangerous animal, worse than any, most destructive and cruel to an extent that, you know, at this moment things are going on the planet that are so horrifying that. So it's that dilemma, I think, is really heightened at this time in the world. And so being awake is not just for citizens of your own little community, but also can we be awake to the bigger picture?
Yeah. I have a question for you. So as I'm listening to you, first I wanted to, well, I don't want to go there. There's so many places I could go, but I want to bring it to the time that we're in. I feel fondly of the art of hosting because I can feel the shoulders upon which art of hosting stands. Like when I'm in a circle, I feel it. I feel generations behind me just when I'm sitting there with that circle. But at the same time that I feel enamored of the consciousness raising and the learning in community that feels deeply embedded in, as you said, sort of the principles of the universe that are about the collective well-being of every human, I'm impatient. It feels too damn slow sometimes. Or I wonder, is it enough when I see brutal stuff happening, and what's my role as citizen to confront brutality in the midst of all this consciousness raising? I don't, as I joke around with people, I don't want to just float away on a cloud and bliss out on a cloud, right? And I have many friends who are Black in the United States who I'm afraid for their safety because they're conspicuous. They stand out like a sore thumb right now. So I'm just trying to hold the nuance of that, knowing that I feel this same devotion that you do to this collective learning, and then at the same time, this impatient protectiveness and desire for accountability.
I will be very happy to share what I understand, see, and practice in this particular field. And it certainly is a danger if we just become happy little hobbits in our own little spiritual communities, living the future, but don't give a damn about the rest of people. But you gotta have to start somewhere. And I think many of us have been raised, educated, have learned in life to not prioritize being human, to not prioritize the things we've talked about so far. And so each of us have to pick up and find our own practices. But what then? Now that we have found them, practice, and we're beginning to find each other, what is our work? And this happened to me, after the first years of just enjoying so much meeting other people. You think you're alone with this, and you realize there are millions of us, little humans who just want to live harmonious lives, and don't have all of this racial, definitions in our brain. I've just never understood because I'm raised in a holistic, humane consciousness, and I've not left it. So to me, so now here comes the warrior then. So there's a midwife and there's the warrior. And what would the warrior of the heart do? The warrior and the midwife, I think, is two energies that can be uniting and become one. I started practicing jiu-jitsu, very, very fierce Japanese self-defense practice at the age of 9 and practiced for 3 years because I was mobbed in school and beaten up by this guy who later became my friend. I never used the jiu-jitsu on him. I could have killed him, broken his arms and legs if I wanted to. But the way I was taught this very fierce 15-year-old, 1500 years old Japanese warrior practice to defend yourself against people attacking you with weapons. And later I've stepped into Aikido practice, which I have is part of my personal practice. So I remember Susan Spakowski, who was the director of the Alia Shambhala Institute in Halifax, saying to me after she had participated in one, they invited me every year with some of my colleagues to do art of hosting trainings at the institute. And that's how art of hosting began to spread it across America and Canada out of the yearly institute. And she said, Toke, there's something you are practicing art of hosting, like it's the martial art of hosting. What's behind that? And he said, if you want to experiment further here, we love what you do. We invite you back every year. Do you want to experiment with even taking that warriorship further? Because we think we need peaceful warriorship in the world to stop, go against some of those injustices. And that warriorship we all have, could it be enhanced? So we did an experiment for 5 years. We called it Circle, Brush, and Sword. And I did this together with my friend Bob Wing, who's a sword Aikido master from Boulder, and Barbara Bash, who's a calligraphy practitioner, also Shambhala practitioner from New York, upstate New York, and then me with a circle, brush, and sword. And out of my Aikido practice and that, I've created this what I call the Warrior of the Heart Dojo, or the Practicing for Peace Dojo. Now, these are gained personal practices. They can become collective, but it's to give us strength, so we will not say no. If the moment comes where you can be sitting in your local decision-making council, whether you're a politician or you're a citizen, whatever anybody steps into, to not shy away when those exhilarating, scary moments come where you can stand up for life, where you can stand up for, injustice, where you can, be the voice that speaks against, the bullshit. And and so I think you will meet this in many of us within the art of hosting are not afraid to move. And, we have been invited into the corridors of power. I spent many years working within the European ministries and teaching art of hosting there. And now it's embedded there completely and accepted, where real changes that there are many stories, thousands of practitioners practicing in all kinds of fields. But again, it has to be real for each of us to not, so that courage to be yourself and the courage to move. Otto Scharmer's work, I love, and he's we are in cahoots, Otto and I. I said to Otto last time we met, I said, Otto, don't you feel sometimes that you are invited into the corridors of power just to awaken the life force in there? I said, every single fucking moment. So some of us have really that fierceness, but it only needs to, and what I was wanting to say with Otto is that, in the U theory, which is certainly not his, it's an ancient pattern of transformation that he has picked up and made available for us now. But in my own perception of when, where, and how change, real transformation happens, I've understood this. And I think Otto has seen the same, and he describes it differently. But to create the conditions for shifts to happen in the heart, or for shit to be cut away so the heart opens, and the real human being that is not afraid to apologize, that's not afraid to say no, thank you to the bullshit, to that being. When those moments happen, they're instantaneous.
Mm.
But to create the conditions for that to happen in a way that doesn't hurt, that doesn't create wounds, that doesn't create, that heals. That we talk about in the Aikido practice that there is cuts with this when we practice with real swords and wooden swords. And there's a way of cutting where you cut bullshit, you cut unconsciousness, you cut fear. And if you can come from that place in yourself, you're actually cutting yourself first. And then your actions can have that. And I'm sure you must have experienced it. Moments where you have been transformed and another one has been transformed. And it was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But it was also incredibly fierce. And it might be a sentence or a quiet when the expectation is somebody would say something. Or when everybody's expecting you to say yes, you feel in your heart, no, this is not, it doesn't need to happen. And you will just. So it's a good question, Traci. Thank you. I think that's, but for me, it always spins down to, is it real for me? Is it real for us? If it is real for me and real for us, then we can make it, invite other people to come into the reality of how it would be better, how it would be more, not fake harmonious, but real harmony. The collaboration of all things in the universe is the kind of harmony that it takes for something new to ever come forth. And we can lean because we are now coming to the point in our evolution. And look what's going on these hours in your country, in your United States now. Can choose the bully, or you can choose respectful, democratic, not so easy ways, but to embrace everyone and not just to create a fake democracy that serves the few when it's supposed to serve the many. And it is time now, I think. So I have been, and many people have asked me, what do you target? What do you strategize? I don't. I let go. And I I hone myself to be able to listen to those invitations that comes through other people, through other situations, into me. And I can feel this is mine to do. And if I can feel this is not mine to do, I will trust you will do it, or she will do it, or he will do it. But when I can feel this 100%ness, I will become a blade of love, a fierce blade, and move. And it has taken me to the decision making in government. It has taken me to villages right after civil war. It's taken me to the West Bank and working with Israelis and Palestinians. But it has come. It's like almost. I can be
I know
called
the
first.
feeling. I know
Right,
the feeling. This was the feeling that emerged in me when I first sat on the sidewalk.
right.
It's not a it's not performing for people to think you're a good person. It's not to rush in and save people. It's like, well, I'll only describe it for myself, Toke, but I feel like I'm in some kind of resonance with you. It was like, it was in my dreams and it wouldn't leave me. And it kept coming alive in my chest. And I would talk to people about it and they're like, no, that's weird. And I'm like, I can't let it go. And I didn't quite understand, but I had to just do it and not, and I had to let go and not know. But I think
So
this is beautiful what you're saying, because so much of what we're doing has so much agenda or ego. And I'm hearing you say, look, if you're going to step into that warrior spirit, it has to still be grounded in your beingness and your practice. Because in my experience, my warrior can easily be co-opted by my ego, and I can be pretty darn self-righteous.
that is certainly a danger. But I think we are uncovering. I mean, this moment together, we are dialoguing to uncover more so we can see more. But, it's what's going on in so many humans' lives. And I think Corona and, horrible that so many thousands and thousands of people are dying from it. But the invitation from nature for the whole human species to stop and reflect is a gift to me.
Mm.
I could not have imagined a year ago that this could happen. I hoped for it. I remember reading this beautiful poem of Pablo Neruda some years ago, where he talks about 12, counting to 12. Have you ever seen this?
Oh.
I'll send it to you afterwards. It's beautiful. It's just a little poem. He talks about that he sees the possibility of the whole human race to just stop and be brothers and sisters and just see that all this stuff we are doing is most of it is not necessary. And now, the situation has been, we have had that invitation. Now we'll see how we all come out of it eventually. And there might be more of these beautiful moments of where we can't take life for granted, and we know it because we forget. But there's something very beautiful, and I could hear it when I also was reading your website, that then when this call comes that is real, what is my, imagine if each of us just has one thing to do in this lifetime. One. We may be doing more, but if we would just be available for that which is our gift, our little, whether it is to create a piece of music or it is to instigate another paradigm of governance or to create a mime that travels across the planet where people with intentionality sit down and sidewalks and listen to each other and count to 12 together and just realize that it's very, very simple. But in that simplicity lies so much contentedness or, comfort. And when we are comfortable and when we are in that harmony, we are so kind and are so willing to give. And this is where that word hosting came from, that we can become hospitality. It's not fake. It's not it's just, my grandson, he lives next door. I have two grandsons next door, and he just came over and they're not in school because of COVID, but their parents are both school teachers. So we live as a little family community here on the hill down to the lake there. And he was so respectful. It was dark. He was knocking because I was meditating and Monica was shopping early. So not too many people in the shops. And he needed some, he's on Zoom with his school teacher, and he's 8 years old. School teacher said, now you should make a collage today. And he explained what a collage was. And then Felix didn't know what a collage was. So his mother saying, you have to cut pictures and shapes out of magazines. And Monica has architectural magazines. Maybe you can go and ask if she has an old one. So he was coming over to get some resources from us, but with such respect and so real, and so it's like so sweet. And I couldn't find it. And I think, I don't know if we have it. No, that's okay. I'll come and ask back and I'll ask Monica. And I realized that when kids are being seen and we share love with them, then we share love with ourselves. And then living in love and peace is not a old, stupid hippie idea.
Mm-hmm.
This is how the fucking universe works.
Mm-hmm.
And we have, one day I hope we will, and maybe that's really what's happening now, that nature and all the circumstances of falling asleep in our democracies and think everything will happen automatically and we can leave it to, and we don't need to be conscious citizens, is teaching us that, it takes effort. But if we can put the effort towards respect, love, fairness, wisdom, accepting and making equal opportunity for everyone, we have the resources, but we're spending on war. And so I am really, I'm a fierce warrior for peace, I tell you. And, I see all the art of hosting and anything, even Zoom, podcast, everything I see is weapons of peace. And I use, today I use the word weapons because we are having this conversation. But I think that it is time now, because scientists, thinkers, visionaries are beginning to inform of us, and I can feel it in my own heart, that if we don't shape up to become citizens, consciously contributing, the human species will be extinct in 50 or 100 years, and the rest will go on. And so, not to work from fear, but I think these are things that I am trying to just not shy away from seeing. And so that urgency you were mentioning, how can I be in my calm and be inspired by the urgency, but not be overwhelmed by the urgency and move into becoming violent in the name of peace? But on the other hand, coming back to the full circle with my parents, I often thought, what was going on in them when they made the decision to enter the resistance? You were taken, you were sent to the camps, you were tortured, and you were, many of them did not survive. My parents luckily did and were not taken by the Gestapo. But and so there could be a time, and this is, I think, what we are seeing in America this week, in the coming weeks, that now force must be used to suppress the bully and the brown shirts of the bully. And that was the whole history of the Allies. Unless the Allies had risen up and be willing to go to war, I don't know what the history of Europe would have been and the rest of the world either. So there's nothing right and wrong. I think each moment takes what it takes. But I find that finding my place and listening to my call and then acting on it sincerely, I can do my contribution, but I can't save the whole world. Neither can you, neither can nobody.
Mm.
If we can live the future we want a little bit more every day,
Yeah.
eventually it will be so. And
Mm.
I hold that intention for 7 generations and more.
I feel so connected to you and grateful, and I'm just scratching the surface. I need to be held too, as I'm holding my own peaceful warriorship. And so I found a place to be held in the art of hosting community. So I'm really grateful for getting to stand on your shoulders, really. I mentioned to you, because I think, I could talk to you all day, but I'm sure you have other things you want to do. I
I
think it would
do.
be I think it would be a good time to close. And I mentioned to you before we started that we have a bit of a ritual where I step out of the dialogue with you and I invite you into the dialogue with the people that listen on the sidewalks here at Sidewalk Talk, and to speak directly to them whatever feels fiery in your own heart, either words of wisdom or a wish directly to them as the way that we complete. Does that sound good?
That sounds good. I'll offer what I can. Wish, words of wisdom. I don't know, but this is the time to remember who we are and to not be afraid of going on the most important exploration that each of us can do is to discover who we really are.
Mm.
We are human beings. We are alive. We will die. We have breath. We have a loving heart. We have kindness in us. What we practice, we will become. What you practice, you will become. You have become. What I practice, I will become or I have become, and then I can keep on becoming. So to me, it's been a great gift in my life to discover the practitioner in me. And I invite you to discover the practitioner in you. And then the and then find those practices that will keep you awake at this time. Rumi speaks it very beautifully in one of his poems. He says, friends don't scatter and go back to sleep. Our friendship is made of staying awake. So this is our time. And let's make the best of it. And not the time for fear, judging yourself or the other. Find that flow of consciousness, of love that is your life force in you. And if you don't know how to find it, stick to your breath and it'll take you there. Thank you.
Toke, this was awesome. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.
You're
When
welcome.
this goes live, I'll send it to you, and thank you again. Enjoy your grandsons today in the snow too.
Ah, yes, thank you. I will. And thank you for your efforts and to stick with it. I think this is very, very important. I feel that these things we each can do goes both sides. We can offer it and then it can help others, but also as we have those things to do, it helps us stay sane. Because
Mm-hmm.
despair would like to eat us for breakfast. And when people despair, we are subject to be controlled. And there are people, a few people in the world who do want to control other people, and as we are seeing displayed, not just in America, but in many other countries, in many other places. But I trust that it is actually a few people, and most of us just want that dignity and that love and that clarity to be real for us. So take care.
All right.
Bye
Ciao,
bye.
ciao.
See you down the line.
Yep.
Where are you in Germany, by the way?
I'm in Heidelberg,
Heidelberg. Okay. Well,
near the castle.
yeah. You're south of me here, but it's not that. If you come to Denmark, come visit.
I will do. We can go sit on the sidewalk and listen to strangers together.
I'll go sit on the bench by the sidewalk. Here is the lake and the river. It's a good place to be.
Yeah. Beautiful. Okay. Bye-bye.